Is your net worth $1 million or greater and you're just freaked out about getting sued, but overwhelmed by all these lawyers? You should make this LLC, that LLC, this domestic asset protection trust. Let me just break it down and bring you from steps 1 through 7 what I think that you should be doing to adequately protect your net worth. Let's get into the video here and let's learn how do you protect yourself from potential litigators out there, especially those stupid, frivolous lawsuits. If you're in the medical field, you know it's a matter of life and death, and being the direct practitioner puts you and your family's wealth on the line for lawsuits, even the frivolous ones. And let's face it, we live in a very litigious country here in the United States. Now, whether it's malpractice suits or random litigation tied to other ventures, your wealth is constantly on the line. Lawyers know that doctors are high earners, and they often make easy targets in court. Now, I get it, asset protection is one of those unsexy yet absolutely essential pillars in your financial strategy. Like taxes, it's not just what you make, but what you keep at the end of the day. If you're under $1 million, $2 million net worth, you may not have enough money to even worry about. But certainly when you become an accredited investor, like many of folks in our community, you get above that $1 million threshold, you start to ask yourself, I have something to lose here. Certainly that's where I was. When I was in my 20s and I owned rental properties, I didn't put them in LLCs and do all of that asset protection stuff we're going to talk about here. But back then I didn't really have much to lose and therefore wasn't a big target to get sued at that point. Now what we do know is the US legal system is not fair nor really consistent, and it's rarely about having your day in court to go in there and argue your case. In reality, majority of the time, 90% or more of cases are just reaching a calculated settlement amount. So if you can do some of these strategies, you can simply mathematically dwindle down these settlement amounts. One of the big things here is just lowering yourself to a point where you're just not a big target, less of a legal sitting duck. And we're going to be taking this sequentially. Now, asset protection doesn't mean that you're going to hide your money in offshore accounts like foreign criminals or like in the movies. It's all about making sure your wealth is well organized and, more importantly, unattractive to anybody looking to get at your money or suing you. So step 1 here. First thing first, form an LLC for your practice. This is your first layer of protection and is a limited liability company or an LLC. Setting one up for your practice or any type of business that you have that has operational or lawsuit liability is critical, particularly if you're just starting out. An LLC provides a legal separation between your personal assets and your business. So let's say a patient sues your practice. If your business is under an LLC, only the assets owned by the LLC are at risk, not your house, savings, or other personal investments. Essentially, this helps create a protective boundary that ensures your personal wealth stays shielded, even if your business faces legal issues. Now, it's not total protection, which is why it's a first step, but it's a good building block to build on. And as you're going to start to see, you start to build together this asset protection. An analogy that some people like to use is protecting your castle. When you have a castle, you've got your moat, you've got your archers, you've got your tall walls, you've got your inner walls, and then all kind of booby traps in there. That's what you want to think of like your LLC. Maybe call that your moat in a way. We're getting into step 2 here, which is separating your real estate from your practice or other business ventures. Or if you're not a doctor and you just own rental properties or some other operational businesses, it's interchangeable. Now, this is where you want to separate your assets. So if you own the building where your practice operates, you should separate the property ownership of your business by creating a separate LLC, as we mentioned in step 1, but also create a separate LLC for the real estate. Then lease the property to your medical practice through a formal agreement. And it's important to keep this paperwork very formal so that if it does come under question, it does look very legitimate. You are running these things as 2 separate businesses and entities. Now, I've seen medical professionals fall into the trap of mixing these two, and it's like putting your eggs in one basket. A lawsuit against your practice could threaten your real estate too. So this is the whole idea of separating them. By doing this, you protect the property if something goes wrong with your practice and vice versa. So side note, from a tax perspective, I've seen some medical professionals, folks in our investment group, use this as a tax strategy to help qualify themselves as a real estate professional status. Now, we have some other videos on this topic, which you can also access at our website at thewealthelevator.com/tax, where people are using this real estate professional status, or REPS for short, to offset ordinary income. Part of this, and we're not going to get into the details, they're now using this property management that they created through this entity that owns the real estate for their practice and allocating hours on their behalf. So maybe they might have their spouse operate this property management, take the rent checks from the medical business, and use that to qualify them to get great tax savings on the personal side. But moving on, so step 3, establish a holding company. Now, this is a little bit different than your individual LLC on your business. When you start to accumulate wealth outside your practice, say in stocks, bonds, or real estate syndications, it's all about setting up primary holding company. So this holding company can be your safer investments, such as stocks, LP holdings and syndications, even raw land is pretty safe. Riskier assets like operational businesses, your medical practice, and even rental properties, especially those with tenants, remain well within other individual LLCs. If you think about it in a diagram form, at top you have the parent holding company, and like I said, it may directly own these safer assets that you don't really have much legal liability or risk, but it has a dotted line owning other businesses that are a little bit more risky, such as your medical practice, as I mentioned earlier. Now, it's important to categorize these assets into risky and safe buckets. Again, risky assets are those such as real estate with tenants, businesses, or vehicles. This is exactly why we like the LP holding in syndications. This is part of my journey. I had 11 rental properties, and then I started to meet a lot of these accredited investors, started to learn a lot of these tactics that I talk about on this channel. I realized that when you get above $1 million, $2 million, you start to really worry about getting sued. Frivolous lawsuits. It's crazy what people do these days. Like I said, I just did things haphazardly prior to this because I didn't know any better, and my net worth was rather low back then. But as it started to grow and I met other high net worth accredited investors, I quickly caught on to the fact that I needed to get rid of my little rental properties, for example, or maybe you might want to get your business, your operational medical business, into a holding system where you're able to separate it from your more safe assets. And also, by the way, some people own vehicles within LLCs, and this would probably be more of a riskier asset as it does run around out there and potentially hit somebody and cause you a lot of liability that way. So to recap, you've got safe assets such as syndication, LP holdings. You've got more dangerous, risky assets. It's operational businesses, rental properties where you're direct in line to get sued for a slip, trip, and fall, which happens a lot out there. You want to house these in LLCs separately. On top of that, have that holding company on top to play the management as just another layer there. Now, step 4, respecting your entity organization structure. As we mentioned and set up this idea of you have this hold co up top, and then you have an LLC down here that might own your risky assets and another LLC that might own some of your safe assets, thus separating the two from each other or separating the safe assets from the risky assets. You've got this nice little org structure, and it can get rather complicated as you build upon step 4 and beyond. Part of this, where most people go wrong, is that they don't really uphold their organization structure, meaning that they might slip in terms of corporate filings, taxes, bank account commingling, and other items where you are treating each entity or business separately. Somebody is able to pierce the corporate veil. So all this hard work and cost that you did to set up this cool entity structure goes up in smoke, and then obviously increases your settlement amount if you were ever to get sued. Also, as a side note, one best practice is whenever you sign on behalf of your entities, your businesses, or your properties, make sure you always sign as a manager of that particular entity as opposed to your personal name. Again, upholding your separation of personal versus company is kind of the whole idea. This may seem like a lot of headache. You want to try your best to do this. Another good benefit of this is we talk a lot about passing on the legacy. You're setting up the org chart for passing on these assets to the next generation. These things are somewhat scalable, and you could put many assets into that one leg of the org chart that we're talking about and give this to your kids, right? I think this is a great discussion, talking to the next generation, showing them the org chart, saying, hey, Simba, this is what you own out there, right? These are the conversations that we have within our family office, Ohana Mastermind, of accredited investors, and why our events are so rich on people that have good values and big on passing down the generation wealth to the kids the right way. But on to step 5, asset protection trust. Now, once you've hit that net worth threshold of at least $1 million, couple $1 million, you might want to set up a domestic asset protection trust, or DAP for short. Think of this as more of that next level of LLC that you're going to set up that can offer even more protection. You can also take it a step further and turn these trusts structured in jurisdictions jurisdictions that specialize in asset protection. Some places like Wyoming, Nevada, for example, might have better asset protection laws. And this is when I think you really need to bring on that individual estate planning attorney. You can also now get a little bit more exotic and maybe go international. A very common place that people will set up these trusts is the Cook Islands. Obviously, they're a bit costly, and when your net worth gets to be a sizable amount, probably should be thinking about setting one of these things up. I've seen people get charged $20,000, $50,000 for something like this. If you're under $1 million, you're probably thinking that's crazy. If you think that's crazy, you probably don't have enough money to protect at that point, which is why, again, once your net worth goes over several $1 million, these are the types of things to really start to think about. This is something within our community, a lot of our investors start to get more involved in. It's obviously a lot of costs and a lot of headache too. And it's confusing, but this is the protection that really gets you that next level and makes a potential litigator or creditor be like, wow, maybe I don't want to mess with this guy, right? And let me just settle for pennies on the dollar. So let's just say your entities are all set up and you've got everything in line, and maybe you still lose a lawsuit. An international DAP puts your assets out of reach for a long, expensive legal fight. They may get it at the very end, but like I said, it's going to be a real pain in the butt for them to get the money, thus lowering the settlement amount. And also, they may have to get a lawyer who is licensed in a foreign country to go out there and fight you, which obviously increases the headache. So this is the umbrella shield. And going back to the analogy about protecting the castle, you've got the moat, you've got the walls, you've got some archers there. You probably think that this is already a lot of overkill. But if you have enough wealth to protect, heck, build another set of walls, another drawbridge for all we care. And this is essentially what's going on here as we start to add on these layers. We've got a couple more steps here, but this is the idea. Obviously, they cost more as we go along. What we're trying to do is make ourselves, again, a bad target, and at least at this point, really scaring away a lot of those frivolous lawsuits. Now, getting into step 6 is don't skip on insurance. I probably should have mentioned this as step 0 or step 1, but you probably would have skipped this video because that's boring. I'm just inserting it here because now I think you're drawn in, and this doesn't replace good old-fashioned insurance on your rental properties, your car insurance. What I'm talking about is umbrella insurance. Most people over $1 million definitely need at least $1 million of umbrella insurance. Tack on there your malpractice insurance if you're a medical practitioner. Also, any other specific insurance that you need for your line of business. You want to use the insurance to cover the bulk of any lawsuit, while the LLCs, trusts, and all these other things protect the rest of your wealth. Again, I moved the steps around for a reason, but make sure you do this step first. A few $100s a year, $400 to $500 per year should buy you a pretty good 7-figure amount of umbrella insurance. It's not that expensive. Just go and buy it. Just a peace of mind. And that can also be good momentum for you to make these steps. One mistake I see a lot of investors working with us, they get a little bit of sticker shock with some of these costs and they don't know what to do. And unfortunately, they don't do anything and then they get hit by a lawsuit tomorrow. And that's what we don't want to happen. Start making these conscious efforts, get the umbrella insurance and start moving up. Here we get to step 7. Regularly review and adjust. Asset protection is not a one and done thing. Wealth will grow over time and asset protection strategies evolve too, right? There's always new case law coming out. There's always cool marketed terms out there. So be wary of that. A lot of legal promoters who aren't really attorneys selling these types of products. Other words that we hear is like dynasty trusts, have your cake and eat it too trusts. A lot of these things are the same for irrevocable trusts out there, but have become sort of intellectual property or IP.
They're the same picture.
No different than a software package. A lot of these things are sold in this nature from legal promoters. That makes things confusing for people, and people often end up paying up a lot of money for these kind of marketed type of financial products. So just be aware of that. That's why we say get more involved in a community like ours so you can get around the people who set these things up for themselves so you can get the lay of the land from your peers. Obviously, you want to combo this with a good estate trust attorney, which I always say best one to get is through referral. Now, if you guys are ever looking for referral, please let us know, as we are not giving any tax legal advice. I'm not an estate attorney. I'm not a CPA. We have folks that people in our community have worked with in the past and had good success. If you guys need that, please reach out. But just to close out, asset protection is building a fortress around your wealth. Some people call this protecting your castle. As we said, keep building layer after layer. And if your net worth is still building, it may not be for you. In my book, I talk about the different floors of the wealth elevator. And in there is some guidance in terms of what you should be doing in particular for each floor of the wealth elevator and how do you apply these 7 steps. One last word of caution: these strategies can be construed as cheating the system, right? The purpose what I do is to help people who worked hard for their money. It makes me sick when people get sued frivolously for something that they didn't deserve. I definitely don't condone people doing things just to hide money, especially if there's criminal activity involved. And remember, anything that is a non-justified business move for the purpose of asset protection, especially done after the fact, after a lawsuit has been created, will be seen as a fraudulent conveyance. So that's a big F word right there. That will pretty much make everything you do null and void, as well as disadvantage you greatly in the eyes of the court system, as everybody knows what kind of games you're playing. The important thing is to set it up now before anything happens. Join our community at thewealthelevator.com. And if you need a referral to a good CPA or lawyer to help you out with these types of things, please reach out, team at thewealthelevator.com, and we'll see you guys next time.